Columbo is one of the most influential television series of all time. With its first pilot episode in 1968 and its last episode in 2003, it was known by multiple generations of people. To this day, Peter Falk's iconic performance as Lieutenant Columbo is memorable enough to warrant meme edits.
A Shinigami, huh? You know, my wife's got a friend who knows all about that.
Columbo is a crime drama with a somehow unique twist when it started in 1968. A typical episode will follow Columbo as he tries to solve a crime. Here's the twist. The audience actually knows from the very start who did the murder in a typical episode. And the show's name tells it all. You're here for Columbo himself. He appears to be a bumbling fool sometimes, lost in thoughts, forgetful. But all of this is mostly an act of deception to trap the criminals. A conversation could end with a criminal feeling like he's safe, then suddenly...
Sir, just one more thing.
The point of the show is to see how the detective solves the crime and how the battle of wits between him and the criminal evolves. How will the criminal slip up in conversation? How will Columbo be able to deduce the facts? What mistakes will the criminal make in conversation? And finally, how will the final reveal happen? What will corner the criminal? In an episode, you'll usually see the setup of the crime and the motive. Sometimes, the episode will throw a few twists, like hiding some mistakes or crucial details behind the crime that Columbo must find. Regardless, Columbo through intuition singles out his suspect, then spend the rest of the episode trying to corner them. This kind of approach for a crime show is rarely used these days. First of all, usually giving out the identity of the criminal from the very start is not a very popular thing to do. Second of all, as time moved on, shows based on police and detective work slowly shifted towards realism, meaning fidelity to reality. This show clearly does not care about actual police procedure or actual law unless it's relevant to the plot at hand. But let's be honest, in real life there would be no episode because any decent criminal would just refuse to talk to the police and call their lawyer. It would not make an entertaining show. In this video, I will show you how Columbo's formula works through the final episode of the show, Columbo Likes the Nightlife. Do note that there will be light spoilers, but it is not my intention to completely spoil the episode. This is not a recap or a full review. This Columbo episode, like most in this series, begins with the setup of the murder. Vanessa Farrell kills her ex-husband, Tony, in some sort of self-defense after being assaulted by him, because he discovered her connection to his business partner, Justin Price. Simple setup, really. Quick love triangle, accidental death, and a cover-up. Why cover it up? Well, we're not sure why Vanessa would want to cover it up, but her accomplice, Price, has a business motive to do so.
I don't want to call him either, because in 36 hours, his investment money's going to hit my bank account right now. If this gets out, I am finished.
And, surprise, 36 hours gap. So we don't know what happened or exactly what specifically is forcing everyone to act in such a way. The show does give you the identity of the killers, but not necessarily every piece of information. Then there's a problem to the perfect cover-up. Linwood Coben happened to take photos of the incident and the cover-up in progress, and decides to blackmail Price.
Yeah, I know I don't leave you much choice.
No, you don't.
A fatal mistake, which leads to the actual murder in this case. The guy dies. Price disguised this as a suicide, cleans up quickly and leave. Thus, the enigma that is presented to us is the following. How will Columbo actually solve all of this? There's nothing connecting Price to Linwood's murder because the motive is linked to the death of Tony by the hands of Vanessa. And there's nothing connecting Price and Vanessa. Their relationship is not publicly known. There are many steps to uncover the truth here. I'll leave the plot there. Here we are introduced to Columbo. Immediately the tone is set. Lieutenant Columbo is completely out of place. Even his co-workers seem to see him as bizarre or from another time.
Much appreciated.
This homeless guy, he's the one who finally called it in. He wakes up out of it, probably dead before he hit the ground. You know what I mean? You look at those marks and bruises on his neck, they're pretty severe. So,
You say that office is up on the 4th floor?
yes, sir.
Is there a John up there?
Sir.
A bathroom?
Yes, bathroom. 4th floor, suite 424. On his employers. So we can have a place to start, sir.
But what's interesting is that Columbo is shown in such a peculiar way for modern TV. Though he is the genius detective of the show and he's unconventional, he's not an asshole, nor shown to have some kind of mental condition. He's just a weird guy that happens to be a great detective. Compare this kind of character to the now classic assholes geniuses like Dr. House or anyone that followed the formula of such a character.
Dr. House. You must be full of baloney. A lot of it.
Right.
Columbo doesn't need that. He's just a weird dude. Columbo does not need an excuse to be the way he is, and he does not need to be an asshole tolerated by his colleagues because of his talents. After some quick deductions and investigation, Columbo is directed toward Justin Price. And in the first encounter with the criminal, we see how Columbo operates. Lieutenant Columbo uses something akin to the Socratic method. I'll give you an example of that method first from Plato's Hippias Major, which gives an account of a discussion between Socrates and the sophist Hippias. Socrates asks Hippias to define beauty for him because a friend asked him to do so. Socrates, presenting himself as ignorant and dumbfounded by what his friend asked, came to Hippias because he is so good and whatever. Hippias is happy to oblige. After all, Socrates came to him because he believed him to be knowledgeable. What's the answer? A beautiful woman, of course. That's what beauty is. Obviously, this is the dumbest answer that was ever uttered by our species to any given question, and we could expect Socrates to ridicule Hippias for even giving it. If you want to define beauty, you're not going to give an example of it, because an example is not a definition of any concept. What does Socrates do then? He decides to take the fault upon himself and refuses to ridicule Hippias. He says, "But you see, my friend won't be satisfied with that answer, even if it's really good." The goal is to keep the conversation going. By playing ignorant and refusing to attack, Socrates makes Hippias say more than he would have otherwise. And this is the same thing Columbo does. Let's analyze the first encounter between the detective and Justin Price. At this point in time, Price does not know that Columbo believes that the death is actually a murder. Columbo will not give that information away either. This way, Price will be more likely to collaborate and less on guard. Columbo opens the conversation with misdirection.
It's quite a place you got here. Really very impressive.
Thank you. It's been a long time in the works.
Must cost a lot of money for something like this.
Yeah.
All of this is put in place so the detective presents himself as someone who needs help to tie up a few loose ends. And since Price has no reason to not help and doesn't want to appear suspicious, he will be more inclined to help in hopes of throwing away suspicion from himself. He is especially motivated since Columbo just seems to want this to be over quickly.
Right, on the phone, did I mention that the victim, he had a rope around his neck?
You did.
Good, because obviously this looks like a suicide, right?
Yeah.
One problem, no eyewitness. Nobody actually saw what happened, you understand?
Yeah.
So to close up this case, this, market suicide, go on to something else, my boss, he's going to have to rely to a certain extent on what people who knew Mr. Coben had to say about him.
And Columbo also says that he just wants to close the case quickly for his boss. He doesn't need to be around for long. So Price, thinking he has the upper hand and an opportunity, will try to misdirect Columbo.
Now, you knew him, correct?
That's right.
So tell me about him. Did he have problems?
Lieutenant, this wasn't the first time.
Usually we could expect someone to further question this specific thing, but Columbo subtly doesn't take the bait and instead changes the conversation.
How do you know?
Because he told me.
Oh, this is very valuable. So this party that you had last night, what do you call them?
A rave.
Oh, right. So this rave you had last night, any reason in particular for Mr. Coben to be there?
Columbo knows it's not a suicide, but cannot afford to stop the conversation or raise suspicion by questioning Price. By simply shifting to the presence of Coben last night, the conversation does not stop. Columbo doesn't challenge the information that Price gave. Pushing forward, Columbo asks about the relationship between the victim and Price.
Look, Lieutenant, if I'm telling you this, I'm telling you this in confidence, right? You need information and I'll tell you what I know, but if what I'm about to tell you were to get out, it would finish my business.
Not to worry.
Thank you. So,
Price then attempts to collaborate by explaining the deal. That way, he won't have to talk about last night more. It's a gamble he's willing to make, since, as of now, the death is still a suicide for him. What does he have to lose by telling Columbo about this? He might find out by himself anyway, and then it would only arouse further suspicion. By the way, guys, always remember to talk to a lawyer before you talk to the police.
these celebrities would occasionally do something maybe they shouldn't. That's when I'd call Linwood. Tell him who's who, what's what. He'd come down, you know, get a few pictures and then, well, strike a deal with the person's rep, you know, get the negatives for a price.
So after talking about the deal, which is a blatant blackmail operation, what does Columbo do?
Look, I know it's not the most savory way to make a buck or two, but...
Oh, no, please. No, I'm not here to judge you.
Well, I appreciate that.
All right.
He acts as if it didn't bother him. The goal is to keep the conversation going. There's no reason to be hostile and do moral grandstanding for Columbo. The conversation must go on and the information must be gathered. Then the lieutenant redirects the conversation again.
So last night he came there to give you your cut of the last deal.
That's right. You know, looking back, he was probably putting his accounts in order.
Again, Price hopes to take the conversation away from last night, but Columbo goes back to it.
So, what time was that?
Which is the real important question.
Around midnight?
Then a follow-up to this.
Could you tell me who the person was in these pictures? Who he made the deal with?
Which gets no answer. Of course, Price is not going to tell which celebrity was in the photograph of the victim. And even if Columbo doesn't get an answer, he doesn't push.
I'm sorry, Lieutenant. It's just that these celebrities, they're a little bit sensitive.
That's all right. I probably wouldn't know who they are anyhow. But my wife, you know, she keeps up on these things.
He is presenting himself as investigating a suicide. He has no reason to be hostile. He acts as if the attitude was understandable and even talks about his wife. And Columbo's fishing for information doesn't stop there.
So I take it to a place like this. That's a step up for you then.
Well, I'd like to think that it's more than a step up. Yeah, it's...
Though this question seems to be of no relevance to the case, it is to Price. We even see him hesitate. Columbo congratulates him and certainly noticed the hesitation.
Okay, they're just wrapping things up. This guy, Columbo, he just thinks it's a suicide. We're sweet, okay? Everything...
The encounter was successful for Columbo. He got information without really putting the suspects on edge so much. What's the next step? Well, Columbo has to be thorough, so he establishes the movements of Price for the night of the second murder. The first encounter with Price showed something to Columbo. There's a connection between him and the victim. He had a weird deal going on. He was hesitant on some things, and he was unaccounted for a while. Then Columbo can start his second phase of confrontation. He will now be a bit more direct. We see that for the second encounter, Columbo forces a discussion at a bad time.
Is this a bad time?
Couldn't be worse.
He acts innocent, but with Columbo nothing is really innocent. And we see the following scene play out.
You know, I'm not so sure it is a suicide, Mr. Price.
Wow, that's amazing. What, I'm now a suspect, is that it?
Is that amusing to you?
There is something very special about this very moment in the episode, because Columbo, who is played by an almost 80 years old, is shown as threatening. Now, some people can say that they cannot see Peter Falk as threatening here. After all, he is an old man. But the threat isn't going towards the person who watches, but the criminal. Price is intimidated. He feels threatened. That's the important part. Columbo's threatening nature is set in universe. You, personally, do not need to feel threatened. After all, Columbo is supposed to be the protagonist you're rooting for. Also, think about this. It doesn't matter how the detective presents himself to you. If you committed murder and you are being openly suspected, and realize that the bumbling fool in front of you is actually not an idiot, you will be under pressure. Columbo is shown as inoffensive and absent-minded, but that's just a front. He's at first not taken seriously or not even seen as a police officer.
Good afternoon, miss.
Oh, I'm not interested.
The detective shows his true colors through sharp observation and attention to details.
That's strange.
What's that?
It's silly, I know, but I notice the strangest things. I just assumed from these indentations in the carpet here, it would appear as though you recently had a bigger coffee table.
You know what? I forgot. I did just buy a new one.
All right.
Even when we see him having a conversation, he's still listening to what's happening around him.
Yeah, those threats you heard about, the ones against Linwood, some pretty interesting stuff. You're not gonna believe it.
Excuse me just a second. Excuse me. The name you just mentioned, the missing person. What was that again?
And though he asks stupid questions, they are never stupid and always have a purpose.
What are these fish called?
Koi.
Fantastic.
So, why are criminals even engaging with Columbo? Because they believe they can help him, that they can lead him away from the truth. They think they can win because Columbo lets them believe they can win. That's the whole point of the character and his use of the Socratic method. You don't need a conventional good-looking sociopathic genius to make an interesting character. Columbo showed us that you can be an old man and still lead. Columbo showed us that you can be brilliant, bizarre, without being an asshole. Columbo showed us that you can be a threatening character without being openly hostile. It would have been nice to see just one more thing like this before the end of this series. Because the last episode of Columbo actually showed it was possible for the show to work in a modern era. Thank you for watching. With that, I believe I'm done.